thanks for joining me today. So today we just want to continue talking about just being you, being the person that you were created to be. And we want to talk about David. I think he was a good example of somebody who accomplished his purpose despite the challenges he faced throughout his life. But he was just himself. I'm sure we can all identify with challenges. I certainly can. So we want to zero in on the story of David and Goliath, because I believe that story was a game changer for David. It actually positioned him to move forward towards his purpose. And the story is told in 1 Samuel chapter 17. Most of us must have heard about this story, about this brave young shepherd boy who went out and killed this big giant and gained the victory for Israel. So we find that David, he went around inquiring about this giant who was threatening to kill anybody who challenged him. And then in the end, King Saul, who was actually the king at the time in Israel, he summoned him. And then he told him that you can't possibly win. In verse 33, it says that you're just a small boy and this giant has been a warrior since he was young. But eventually David manages to convince Saul that he can actually challenge and defeat him. So we pick up the story in verse 38, where Saul has given him his blessing, basically. And then he says, okay, put on the helmet and another piece of armor, the tunic, and so forth. And in verse 39, David ends off putting a sword onto his armor as the last piece of his armor. And then an interesting thing happens. He tries to walk and he can't. He says, I can't walk in this, I'm not used to this. And he takes off all the armor. Then the next verse, verse 40, he picks up his 5 stones and his sling. Now we need to note that he would have been used to using a sling because he was a shepherd boy and he was used to defending his sheep and warding off wild animals. So definitely a sling would have been one of the things you'd have used. And then we fast forward to verse 49, where it says that with just one shot, he killed Goliath. And the stone went right in the middle of the forehead. And Goliath fell down and died. And verse 50 actually emphasizes that he just killed Goliath with one slingshot and a stone, not a sword. Now I find that is a very inspiring story because he didn't use a complicated strategy. He didn't know how to use a sword. He used what he had, what he was confident with, and that was a sling and a stone. And in life, we don't have to always use complicated strategies. Let's look at what we have, what we're good at, what we're skilled in. Yes, of course, we have to improve on those things, but we can start there. And then we just have to put on courage and confidence, go out there, and we too can succeed. And then the other thing is, if you don't define yourself, other people will define you. Because remember, Saul, though he meant well, had initially discouraged him from even fighting Goliath. And then David had to convince him. And then once he had given him his blessing, he was now trying to put the armor on him, almost as though to say, you can't possibly stand a chance without wearing this armor. And yet, that was not the right fit for David. He took off the armor, he shook it off, and he just went as himself. And sometimes we need to do that. We need to define ourselves. Yes, I know Saul, he meant well, but sometimes we just have to put on confidence and courage and do what we know best and go out there, and we will do well and we'll fulfill our purpose. And I just want to finish off with just this quote from Oscar Wilde. He says, "Be yourself, everyone else is already taken." I can't put it any simpler than that. So all the best, go out there, be courageous and confident and fulfill your purpose. I will catch up with you next week when we continue the series. Bye for now.